The biggest struggle, or at least what I hear the most, and I think the consensus, at least within the community, is you're constantly dealing with the worst of the worst when you go to work. Let's just say, for sake of the rules, that 95% of people are good people, and then only 5% are bad or malicious. 95% of law enforcement officers are good people, only 5% are bad or malicious. So in thinking about that, you have to understand that law enforcement officers go to work every single day, and they don't get to deal with the 95%. They are dealing with the 5% of the population 100% of the time.
Right.
So nearly everybody that they deal with is difficult, may not like them because of the uniform, may not like them because of the reputation, the stereotype, whatever that may be. And so they are constantly having to be on the defense when it comes to interacting with the public, and in many ways almost doing customer recovery even before they open their mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Wow.
people have already had a bad or negative experience with law enforcement. So the simple piece is,
Well, when you're going to jail, you
Yes.
blame everyone but yourself.
But yourself.
Yeah,
Yes, that's
so.
exactly right. Or even when you run that red light, you blame everybody.
No, I
but
didn't run that
yourself.
red light. It was
Yes.
yellow.
Yeah.
When I went through there.
That's exactly right. So understand that law enforcement is dealing with the 5% of the population that may not be good people, but it's there 100% of the time. Okay, so just know that. The second thing is that they, unlike veterans, are unable to leave the battlefield. The battlefield is a constant for them. Even when you're an off-duty law enforcement officer, you're still responding to things, you're still taking care of things. You may even have a second or third job. Veterans, however, at least have the luxury of leaving the battlefield and going back to the FOB, or even leaving the FOB and going back to their home. And so the mental battlefield is still with them, but for law enforcement, they're constantly in the physical battlefield, and that is so exhausting.
It seems that in this day and time, too, with law enforcement being front and center across the country, protests and more,
Mm-hmm.
it only heightens the I don't know, their situational awareness, where they're constantly watching,
when you
because
get
now they're
shot
more
and
of a
killed
target.
because
Right.
you're wearing a uniform or sitting in a police car, yes, that would heighten my awareness too.
And so, how long can you? It's got to wreak havoc on your nerves,
It
you know,
does.
to
It does,
even if you're not
absolutely.
going to admit it, to constantly have to look more. You're in the battlefield.
You're on edge all the time. It never goes away. And a simple example of that is the guy, the officer that just found those two kids that drowned in the reservoir
Right.
over in Tulsa County. He was off duty. He had no reason to be there for work whatsoever, and he just happened to be the guy to find two small toddlers who had drowned. Now,
How do you deal with that? I can't imagine the things that officers see.
You go see somebody.
Wow,
That's
I mean,
how.
that's-
Yeah. But, in thinking about that and just the irony of the fact that he was there and it wasn't a regular citizen who found that, he'll be able to understand and process a little bit more and hopefully have better available resources. And knowing TPD in that department and how they operate, they do have great resources.
Mhm.
They have a lot available to them, which a lot of other agencies do not. But let's talk about the leaving the battlefield, the leaving work when
Coming
you
home,
are
I mean,
coming
at
home.
the end of the
Yes,
day.
coming home at the end of the day. Yes, exactly. So here's essentially what is happening. People are reporting, or officers are telling me, I have a hard time separating work from home life. I have a hard time calming down at the end of the day. And essentially, what that translates to is I have to leave work and I have to pretend like I'm normal when I do not feel anything but normal.
Right.
That
And
is the major issue.
family oftentimes doesn't understand that.
They definitely don't understand that, and we're going to cover family in the next few weeks. We're going to cover family, cover being a child, cover being a spouse or wife of, that kind of thing. But understanding the why behind it, what's happening when you experience trauma is that your brain is logging information in your hippocampus. That's where we store memories. And if we think about that as if it's a filing cabinet, we can store traumatic memories, we can process small memories and information and put them where they need to go in that file folder. Okay, so when I come here, I know where to park, I know where the door is, I know that I have to walk down the hallway, and where my chair is and where your chair is. My hippocampus has logged that information. Okay. Trauma doesn't work that way. Trauma is not able to be stored appropriately and properly in the right file folder. And the big kicker is that our amygdala, which is a very small almond-sized...
There will be a quiz after this.
Yeah, there will be a quiz and bonus questions to earn credit. There is a very small almond-shaped organ, within your brain that's called the amygdala, and the amygdala is simply the smoke detector of your brain.
Right.
Okay, so what happens when you leave work, when you leave your 10 to 12 hour shift as a police officer, you are now trying to go back into the real world, quote unquote, and act normal. But the problem is that when you see something that is alarming to you, or I should even say, when your brain takes in new information or input, your amygdala is trying to figure out whether or not it's dangerous. That's our smoke detector. So in simpler terms, your smoke detector, your amygdala, is trying to figure out, is that information a life or death piece of information?
Mm-hmm.
That image, sound, sight, smell, whatever it may be, interaction with a person. And so the amygdala is trying to figure out, did I burn bread or is the house on fire?
Right.
Okay, so the amygdala takes in the information and then it compares it to old information in your hippocampus. So if you've been through a day where you were wrestling with somebody on the ground and you had to tase them because they tried to hurt you, and the next call was a domestic violence dispute where she says she wants to file charges and then she backs out once she gets there.
Right.
And then the next call is somebody's dog gets run over by a car. We're talking one after another, and then you leave your work shift and now new information is coming in that may not even be harmful to you, but your amygdala and hippocampus are working so hard together to differentiate, is it good information? Can I tolerate this, or is this a threat to my survival?
Is it almost impossible when you're dealing with stress and trauma during the day like that? Is it basically, for the most part, impossible to just truly relax at the end of the day? For some officers, I know some will handle it different than others.
So that's a compound question.
Can they really relax, or are they just kind of going through the motions?
One is that in the moment you're doing nothing but trying to survive, and there's no fault in that. Okay, everybody is simply trying to survive. The guy on the ground and the guy arresting the guy on the ground are simply trying to survive. That's that fight or flight response. Okay, so you're not going to be consciously aware of what's going on in your brain while you're wrestling and duking it out with somebody. When you get home, information will process and move throughout the brain, and that's when you can maybe start to sort things out. But the problem is that your thoughts, and this is the perception sometimes of law enforcement, is that your thoughts are so messed up that you can't figure out what's a real threat and what's not a real threat. Everything's a threat because that's just what you've been through for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours,
right,
whatever it is.
That long
So
shift
everything
sometimes
is perceived as a threat, which means I can't relax. I have a hard time watching television. I struggle to go out to dinner with my family. My daughter says she wants to go down the street to play in the neighborhood playground, and it makes me uncomfortable. All of those kinds of things.
Right.
So you have to really think about what do I do that's healthy? And one struggle for law enforcement is that once they get off work, what do? They go hang out with other people in blue.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
A lot of camaraderie there.
A lot of camaraderie, which can be really helpful, but it can also perpetuate trauma.
Right. Now, Lauren Rich of Rich Consulting, she does this. She's a licensed therapist, and if you need help with trauma or you really focus on trauma. That's the one thing. And
I do.
different levels, way beyond law enforcement, way beyond the battlefield, she can help you. And why don't you just let our listeners know how they can reach you?
Sure, 918-912-2266.
And next week, part 2
Yes.
of this,
Yes.
law enforcement and dealing with trauma. Lauren, thanks for being here this morning.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
So glad to have you here. Lauren Rich of Rich Consulting. Coming up next, 2 Words for You Weather. On the way, Kristen Carollo, ? Haven't heard from her. But I'm counting on her being here this morning with the COVID-19 status report coming up on Okie Country 101.7. Did awesome this morning.
Helpful?
Oh yeah, that was good. What do you think? Hey, would you rate your performance?
Good.